Welcome back to the show, everyone. Craig and Jonah here. So this is a false start. So last night we were out of town for one of our teenage boys' confirmation, and this is such a reflection of my life right now. So I had our youngest, who's a year old, kind of wandering around in the basement of this church because she was not going to sit through a 2-hour confirmation ceremony with our bishop, who gets to be somewhat long-winded.
Yeah.
And so we're downstairs in the corner of the church basement. There's a library.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm always just fascinated what's on the library bookshelves of churches.
Yeah.
And so she's kind of like playing around, and I see a book. It's a catechism. And I literally thought about like smuggling it home and reading it and then just bringing it back the next time I'm there.
I would suspect that would have been okay.
Yeah.
I can't imagine that anybody is dying to get at that, but
yeah, it was it Father Noonan, I think, edition.
oh, I've heard of that guy.
I kind of peeked. I think the copyright was maybe in the early 70s, so it's
Father Noonan edition.
Yeah, SJ, so Jesuit. So
oh man, the
yeah,
Jesuit.
So I was so I think that's sort of in between kind of the old Baltimore Catechism and the current catechism that we've talked about on the show.
Well, that's quite a task for one guy to put that all together.
Yeah, and there's some commentary. Like I'm not.
Oh, he has commentary too.
Well, yeah, like I'm not sure how much of it is him sort of talking about what the church teaches and how much but I was just so I had to go.
Well, I know where you flipped to.
I got to see what this guy says about Onan and masturbation.
Mm-hmm. The most critical topic of our time.
So I'm sitting back there, our daughter's playing on the floor, and I'm sitting there peeking around, looking up masturbation and onanism and
during a confirmation.
So and of course I don't have the book with me, so I can't really quote it, but I'm going to get my hands on a copy of that. And
this is just like the movie National Treasure. Scrolling through an old document in the basement of a church.
It feels that way sometimes. I thought about grabbing my phone out and like scanning, like snapping a few of the pictures, but I kind of got the gist of it. But I was surprised. So it's first of all, it talked about masturbation in terms of it's a premarital phenomenon.
Really?
Yeah, like it certainly talked about
premarital.
Yeah.
I don't even know what to say about that.
I think there is
that's a pretty wide gap between reality and thought there.
And we've talked about this and talked about 2352, that it talk, remember how it says it talks about acts outside of marriage or something like that. Like there's that provision.
Yep, outside of marriage.
Right. Now,
my mind is blown right now.
Yeah. So I mean, he doesn't say it's okay within marriage, but there's just this. I think there's this underlying assumption that it doesn't happen in marriage. There's no reason for it to happen in marriage. What I think it's all the more likely it's going to happen during marriage.
It seems much more likely. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Especially, after it seems like after you have your first child, then it just changes everything.
Yeah. So I was caught by that. There was also the one thing that struck me, and maybe this is the Jesuit coming out, is he was referring a lot to he wasn't even talking so much about sort of the emotional and psychological factors that 2352 talks about that can lessen culpability. He talks about it more in terms of being aware of the cultural norms at the time.
Really?
Yeah. And I really wanted to dig in and like look at some of the footnotes, but It,
Really?
yeah.
So number one, I'm surprised you didn't take a photo of this.
If
Like that blows my mind.
I didn't want to have a kid until I probably would.
So I believe you mentioned previously that the Baltimore Catechism did not say anything about masturbation specifically. So was this an updated catechism, or like it was specifically mentioned in this version of the catechism?
So it doesn't have its own section or like caption, but
Oh,
in the index, it points you to the 2 pages where he talks about it. So it's part of
okay.
an overall flowing conversation.
Probably about sex in general, maybe, or
So I did go. I think it's in the same general section, but like there's another section on contraception. Um, Incidentally, when I was looking at that, somewhere it talks about onanism in the context of contraception. In that term still shows up in Catholic documents, onanism, back to Onan. Um, and it's obvious to me that a significant portion of our historical, philosophical, or theological views of this stuff stems back to the story of Onan, which
the guy that pulled out in the desert.
yeah.
Like, I don't know. Huh. That's wild. I don't know. That's really funny that he would say that it was, something that's more premarital.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what to make of that. Like, how do we get to this point in history and them not understanding just the basic realities? Of course, you and I were talking beforehand off the air about, just even like how common sexless marriages apparently is, and how we think so much of it isn't spouses don't care about each other, respect each other, but just have such a little understanding of how the other side operates and works.
Yep, definitely. I mean, it is a lack of communication, I think, in most cases. I mean, sometimes I'm sure there's resentment and whatever else goes on, but just having an understanding of what the other spouse wants, needs, desires, I don't know, and everything in between. I don't know. It's I don't know. That's funny. You can only hope God is a Jesuit, I guess.
Yeah. I I or Jesuit with a computer simulation somewhere. Yeah, I mean, I have to study that more, but it just struck me as how, not this is not the biggest moral issue in the world.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it, but you talk about probably the most common moral challenge that guys face, at least. And just the fact that it just seems to be reflective of such a underdeveloped, if not inaccurate, just view of reality and in marriage and intimacy just boggles my mind.
Yeah. I don't know. I don't know. Marriage is definitely not just sex filled, I would say, for a lot of people.
Yeah. And maybe this is a fine segue to the whole sexless marriage topic. We were talking a bit before, is that I don't know how common sexless marriage is in Catholic circles. Again, no one talks about it.
Yeah, I suspect that it's just something nobody wants to talk about,
Yeah.
even people that are in it.
Right. Yeah. Who wants to get up and brag about the fact that they have a sexless marriage? Most people don't.
Yeah.
Um,
Like this study says that approximately 15% of married couples are sexless, and that's just the people that admit to it. So I bet you I just based on the people that I have talked to, and because sexless marriages, I think it's less than like once or twice a year or something is considered sexless. So it's not like you have to be totally sexless like for the entire time, but once or twice a year. And I would bet it's more like 30%. I suspect, just because there's people that don't want to admit it, or it's too painful to admit, or whatever. and that's a lot of people.
Well, and kind of getting back to what we've talked about before with like PMAS and stuff like that, like, you know, for, for me, at least personally, if it's, let's say, frequency less than every couple of weeks, that's just pure torture. Like,
Yeah.
I would seriously consider just becoming a celibate than that. And I think so. I don't know how you have a decent functioning marriage where intimacy is every, just sporadic and infrequent, much less, a couple times a year. I think you're just gonna build with resentment and close in on yourself, and it. I think the sexless marriage starts far earlier than, okay, we're doing it a couple times a year. I think it's happening more frequently than that, but you're already on the path towards a sexless marriage because most guys are just completely bent out of shape if it's not.
Well, eventually you get to the point where it's just you're not going to ask, and
Yep.
don't want to be rejected, and
Yep.
I'm sure it goes both ways to some extent, but that's just generally how it is. But found a different study that looks like it's more like 30%. So it's, I don't know, that's an incredible number, and that's just, marriages fall apart without intimacy. Like, there's just no doubt. I mean, it's not the same.
Yeah.
I mean, there's just something that, if you've been intimate with your spouse and then it just stops, there's just something very unnatural about living in that situation, and it creates conflict. Like, without a doubt.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
like, you can just see. So the guys that I know that have talked to me about that, you can just see how painful it is for them. Like, I mean, there's just such pain, like, I don't know. It's and really the only way out of that is communication, and hopefully they care.
Yeah.
Because if they don't, there's just you don't have any hope. Like, I mean,
Yeah.
you don't.
Well, I have wondered about, well, 2 points. Hopefully I'll remember both of them. Personally, I'm not a big fan of the whole definition of sexless marriage as being a couple times a year or whatever.
You think it should be 0 or what?
No.
Ah! If it's less than once a month.
Yeah, I mean, I would, to me, once a month sounds like a sexless marriage to me.
You poor guy that's not.
Yeah, I know, girl, all the sympathy. But I mean, I'd be
Well, yeah,
actually
it's a
miserable.
struggle. Oh yeah.
I'd be totally miserable. I mean,
Yeah. Oh yeah.
so I think realistically, you know, most and I think if that's the frequency, it would quickly turn into like never at all. Like, I would be like, this is not.
Before you know it, you're in separate rooms watching your own TV show,
Yeah.
and you just
Right.
maybe go to bed together, maybe you don't. I don't
Right.
know. I mean,
Right.
that's the reality. I can see that.
Yeah. So I forgot my second point. So
Oh, it's gone.
it's gone. But yeah, I mean, it really, well, okay. I think I remember what it was now. Because I do sometimes ponder whether we as Catholics are in better shape or worse shape, because this is not a Catholic phenomenon. And we were kind of talking before. If you are, I think, for most non-Catholics, they don't really have much of a problem with guys going solo or guys using pornography, or if they may think it's not a good idea, but they're not morally distraught over the use of it. And so I think there's more opportunities for those non-Catholic marriages that struggle with this to not find a bridge back to each other.
It's true.
Whereas for us Catholics, and for us in a special way, when my wife and I had a conversation, she was deeply concerned about my soul and the difficulties of those kinds of sins when intimacy is less frequent than I would like or need. And that's a motivation for my wife, at least part of it.
So this is some thoughts from the Huffington Post on 7 ways to save your sexless marriage, according to sex therapists. I don't really like much of this advice.
Mhm.
Number one, don't assume your spouse is uninterested in having sex.
Okay.
I would say that once you get to that, if it's been years, you're thinking, I don't
What
know.
is she? She has a strange way of showing interest.
Yeah. So I'm just gonna ignore that. I'm sure you can. I don't know. I that's a difficult bridge to get. Number two, acknowledge any resentment you may feel related to intimacy. Then take turns initiating sex. How the hell is that gonna happen?
I'll agree if they agree.
Yeah, I mean, is this is just all about a mindset at this point, and just like how you get the ball rolling. Like there's so much inertia, towards not doing it, that none of these are going to help. Number three, schedule sex. Like that's going to work. You're just going to walk in and say, let's just schedule this. I mean, it may work for some people, but like, I don't know.
I'm actually a fan of that one.
What if it had been years? You're just going to walk in there and say, you know what?
We're filling out the yearly calendar. Let's get our once a month, second Thursday of the month.
No, we're going to schedule it every other day. Get ready. I don't know. That's ridiculous. 4, talk about your fantasies. No way you're going to discuss your fantasies with somebody that, you don't have sex with, like, yeah, would you mind, putting on this whatever costume? I'm sorry. Or whatever. Like, oh, my phone just died. We're only going to get.
Oh,
wait a minute. Thought it did. I get timed out. Learn to work around any sexual dysfunction. Sure. That was number 5. But get out of your head and into your body is number 6. Use candles, romantic music, that sort of thing. And stop worrying about orgasms. I don't know, but I mean, it's not good advice for helping people. So I think the real advice there, like this is the real advice, is to communicate, because you have to talk about things far in advance before you're going to schedule sex night or whatever, talk about your fantasies. You're not going to do that with somebody that, you were intimate with and then you haven't been intimate with in a long time.
I think there's 2 key factors. One, you've talked about communication. I was just fortunate that it just happened traumatically, but it caused us to have a conversation that I just was too scared or whatever to have. But having the conversation made all the difference in the world. But I think second of all, for me at least, is the thing that's made this much easier for my wife is I take great efforts to reduce her mental load. I mean, that really is that. I think for a lot of women, especially if you have young children, the mental load is the biggest barrier.
So what do you do? I have to ask.
I try very hard to help with the things that I can help, especially with the kids. So I spend a lot more time taking the youngest 2 kids, especially the baby. Like last night, like I said, we were sitting in church for a little while, and the little one was getting antsy, and she's like, I was going to take him. I was like, you sit here. I'll take her out. Now, confession to make, I was also able to keep an eye on the baseball score. But even if the game wasn't going on, I was like, we're all human. But
it's quite the sacrifice, Craig.
Yeah.
It's funny, in that same church, one of my friends actually took his son out of church, who was misbehaving, to go out and sit in the car and listen to the college football game. So that's funny. It's the same church and same sorts of scenarios involving leaving to go listen to a sports game.
We're very brutally honest here.
Yeah, no, that's true.
But that, and this is so funny. I don't remember if we've mentioned this on a previous episode, but the other day, my wife and I were talking just about the difference in our intimate life, and she volunteered this comment. I didn't ask. She's like, "You've been much more attentive with the kids." Like, yeah, that's what happens when you're in the bliss period and not in the PMAS period all the time. It's true. And it's not a quid pro quo. It's not like, well, I'm going to repay you because this, like, it's genuinely just
organic or whatever.
Yeah. Your attitude, your mental capacity is all so much better. And, she saw that, and I'm grateful, but I try very, very hard to ease her mental load. So like on the weekends, I try to take charge and deal with the meals and stuff. Doesn't mean I cook all the time, but I don't make her
provide
work.
the food.
Yeah, I put food on the table somehow. But just with the kids, the biggest thing I think is with the kids is just to the female mental load is the biggest thing that men don't understand and appreciate.
That's a really good point, actually. That's very fair as far as they're exhausted at the end of the day, and they've dealt with all sorts of issues and with the kids, and they're just tired.
Well, because of the female, we can be ready to go like that. Women need time to warm up and the arousal curve and all that. And if they're just mentally overloaded, there just isn't time or opportunity for that. And that I think is the biggest thing it took me so long to figure out, and I'm still figuring out, but I'm much more aware of it, and I can definitely attest to the fact
that's a really good point. Actually, that's really good advice. I agree with that too. That's something that my wife and I talk about too. It's just that exact situation.
Yep. I think it's sort of the which comes first, the chicken or the egg. But for the guys, if you want more intimacy, make an effort to take off your wife's mental load. And women,
and to talk to her about her day, as far as like the stuff that just you would, to be honest, to me, it just doesn't seem like it's details that I would ever share with anybody, but to her, it's really important.
Yeah. That's the other thing. And part of that is just sitting there and listening. And I try very hard to listen and to let her talk and to get,
and to not solve the problems.
Yeah.
It's just about listening.
Yep. Just listening. And I don't sit a lot of times I'll be on the other side of the room at the table, and she's got her chair, and I'll pick up the chair and I'll walk over and I'll sit down and I'll just, Joan and I are a few feet away, but I try to get close enough. That is so valuable to her. And I think that's true for most women.
I think so.
Yeah. That's much more, conducive to intimacy for them than us getting up and rubbing their back or touching them. At least for my wife, physical touch is not her love language. And so less is more. I've learned that the less groping going on, the better.
Well, yeah, the back massage isn't always groping, but back massages help, I think.
But I think that has to sort of come after the creating that connection and having this type of verbal intimacy with them.
It's true. I would totally agree with that as well.
But the flip side of that too is that women, if you're complaining that your husband doesn't take off the mental load, test it out. If you increase the frequency, if he doesn't respond and he's not more attentive, then he's a dumbass and kick him to the curb. Send him over to the podcast here. But
then also on the flip side, if that communication, like if you sit down and you talk to your spouse, or like from the male perspective, if your wife is complaining and cutting you down or whatever, that really kills any sort of want to communicate as well. Like it's funny because even if you are intimate, that can kill the bliss period quickly, I think, is that sort of complaining or blaming or whatever, like that stuff. It's interesting. I think like that can have an impact.
Well, it's hard to get it started because she's unhappy because you're not helping with her mental load. And he's unhappy because he feels like he's not getting intimacy enough, and so neither one of them wants to start.
That's the downhill spiral towards the sexless marriage.
Yeah, I think so. This is sort of a post-mortem autopsy that we did in our marriage. I think this is the same conversation the other day when my wife made that comment, but she talked about before, it felt like to her that I was much more affectionate to her on days that intimacy was going to happen in the day after. But like, you know, after a couple days, I was kind of shutting down and sort of being unavailable to her, so to speak, which maybe, I mean, I've tried to be purposeful about just cutting out, like when I'm at home with her, I'm much less likely to be on my phone looking at YouTube and stuff like that. But it gets into that what we've talked about when you get into, past days 3, 4, get into that PMAS period. It's somewhat about self-preservation, about not stirring up emotional feelings for your wife, unless you fall into, old problems and
building the wall.
Right. And so, we're not really trying to be jerks about it. We're just trying to like, okay, I'm just trying to survive till the next time. But in her mind, that she perceives that as like, oh, he's just doesn't care about me, doesn't have any affection for me until the days he knows he's going to get some.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very common experience, and that creates that circular effect where she's unhappy because she feels like she's being used, so to speak, and he's unhappy because he's just like, sorry, honey, but I can't be like super affectionate or whatever on days that it's not going to happen when you get into the PMS, because it just makes it even worse.
Yeah.
They're both in this pattern of being unhappy and resentful, and
yep. Then it spirals out of control. But communication solves it. I mean,
yeah,
it does.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
But can. And if the resentment hasn't gone on so long that you no longer care about each other, but if hopefully in the midst of that there's still a love that you have for each other, you desire each other's happiness, you desire.
I think even that can be dissolved in most cases, a lot of cases. So there's hope.
Yeah. So I don't know. This is kind of a rant, a random. Yeah, lots of twists and turns.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, guys, give your wife that type of emotional intimacy that she desires. Listen to her. Don't try and solve her problems, but just listen to her and let her know that you care about this, that you want to hear her, and this is creating intimacy with her,
and help her with the random stuff that she needs help with,
and help with her mental load. If you can do that long enough, it should come around.
Yep.
But someone has to start. Either the intimacy has to increase, or the guy has to start this process and try and get yourself on the hamster wheel a little bit.
Yep, and do that. And I think you have to communicate, just about intimacy in general at the same time, which is probably more difficult than doing the other aspects of it.
Yep.
So,
all right.
Well, good luck to you.
All right. Well, thank you, Jonah.
Yep.
Until next time, everyone.
Bye.
Have a good one.